Hey, hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson today. We're listening to For My Man. These are the true stories of women who committed heinous crimes in the name of love. For My Man. Hailing from the hardened inner city streets of Chicago, Illinois, Shavante Green is a tough nut to crack.
Shivante grew up in a home with four siblings, two younger sisters, and one younger brother. She was a straight A student, very motivated, but she was just a little bit introverted.
Although she's the oldest of her brood, Shavante's a loner by nature. Instead of going out on dates like her siblings, she spends her time locked away in her room.
She didn't feel like she fit in with the family, that she wasn't like her sisters and brothers. So I think that was probably a difficult time for her.
It only gets harder when at age 16, Shavante's single mom meets a man she falls in love with and uproots the family to go live with her new boyfriend 470 miles away in Omaha, Nebraska.
It's hard enough being a teenager as it is, and coming from one state to another state would be difficult to get used to for her.
Things are not as motivating for her. The grades start to plummet. She is recessed in her own mind that this is not where she wants to be.
Things go from bad to worse when in high school, mom breaks things off with the man she relocated her family for.
After Shavante's mom's boyfriend broke up with her, she kind of went into a tailspin. And she was so distraught that she couldn't even connect with her children, especially Shavante.
Shavante was lashing out by sleeping with anyone, anywhere, anytime. That was her way of rebelling to what had happened in her life.
And her promiscuity soon leads her into the arms of a silver-tongued man she meets while attending a party one afternoon at a neighbor's house. 24-year-old Ronald Ford.
Like most young girls, she liked what she was hearing from the smooth-talking, smooth-walking young man. Good-looking guy, may not be the tall, dark, and handsome, but in her eyes, he is exactly what she's looking for.
Shavante soon falls madly in love, even though her new man's shining armor is a bit tarnished.
Ronald was unemployed, living with his mother. He had a criminal background, but the attention that she got from Ronald, the way that he initially made her feel in their relationship, was probably very wonderful for Shavante.
Ronald Ford was a Paris nightmare. That's why fathers and mothers keep shotguns by their bed for guys like Ronald Ford.
It doesn't take long for him to lay down the law. From the get-go, he likes being in charge and tells Shavante exactly how to live her life, including who she can and can't be friends with.
Ronald was very demanding. He would tell Shavante that she couldn't do this or could do that.
Ronald had some real cards that he could hold in order to keep Shavante in his spell. First of all, he was older, and that's a world of difference. You're talking about more of a seasoned adult versus a teenager.
For the first time since moving to Nebraska, the 17-year-old is actually content.
She was looking for Mr. Right, but quite often settled for all of the Mr. Wrongs. And now here was a guy, Ronald, who she believed really loved her back. And this was life-changing for her.
As time passes, the couple becomes inseparable, and she continues to do anything he suggests, including the hard drugs that he's addicted to.
Ronald was the crystal meth user, and he introduced that to Shavante, which changed her world.
Shavante's family started noticing she would be doing things that weren't necessarily in her character, even becoming more withdrawn.
For the next year, Shavante lives in a drug-induced haze. The now 18-year-old somehow manages to graduate high school and moves in with her deadbeat boyfriend. The pair applies for Section 8, a government-assisted housing program.
Section 8 housing is dependent upon the income and the ability for an individual to have a job So they get subsidized housing. It allows a person to be able to establish their own domain.
Meanwhile, Ronald finds unique ways to pay for their apartment and addiction. For as long as Shavonte's been with her man, he's had an obsession with electronics. And stealing them to sell them is also his only source of income.
A big thing for computers and laptops, anything that was of a value that he thought he could unload very quickly. So these were the items that Ron would sell to support both his habit and now the developing habit of Shavonte.
She did not have a job. She was not going to school, and it seemed as though she was okay with that lifestyle.
In fact, the happy couple is content to spend their days sleeping and smoking meth.
It was about drugs, it was about sex, and it was about pleasing each other.
But love doesn't pay the bills. And when only a few dollars come trickling in, Shavonte finds out just how far Ronald will go to fund their crippling drug habit.
Desperate people do desperate things, and this turned into something unspeakable.
Shavonte would do anything to maintain his relationship.
Chicago native Shavonte Green has finally found love after relocating to Omaha, Nebraska. However, her squeeze, Ronald Ford, isn't much to write home about.
Doesn't have a job, doesn't even have potential to get a job. He's addicted to crystal meth. He doesn't know how he's going to pay for it. He burglarizes, he steals to get his hands on things that he could easily sell.
But Ronald's devious ways come with a price. For the next 5 years, he begins a string of arrests. He's in and out of prison for various offenses, ranging from cocaine possession to burglary to receiving stolen property.
No matter how many times Ronald was incarcerated, no matter how many prison sentences that he had to serve, Shavonte remained loyal to him, and he still had a place to go every time he got out.
Before long, the couple is back to their old selves, looking for ways to pay for drugs. And that's when a desperate Ronald comes up with a plan to sell a stolen laptop he's been tinkering with.
And then he went to a friend of his and asked this friend if he knew anyone that would want to buy this laptop.
The friend, Keith Driver, agrees to pay $400 for the laptop.
Keith provides Ron $20 in good faith that I'll be back with the additional monies. Leave this to me, you can go back home, and I'll get in touch with you when I'll have your money.
Ronald gives Keith a day to come up with the remaining $380. But when he doesn't hear a peep from the middleman, Ronald grows antsy, certain he's being stiffed.
So he tells Shavonte that he's going to go back to Keith's house, and he's going to look for Keith.
And much to her surprise, Ronald says she's going to help him get his money.
Ronald was including her in one of his outings. She was being considered not just an assistant, but a partner.
Under the cover of darkness, the couple drives 2 miles to Keith's home on the edge of town. Though they're met by someone they're not expecting, Keith's girlfriend, Jackie, who's home alone. Ronald explains that Keith owes him money for the computer, and he's not leaving until he gets it.
She lets them into the house. They kind of hang out for a while Shavonte and Ronald wait for Keith to arrive back.
Trouble is, Jackie says she's not sure where her boyfriend went or when he'll be home. And it sets the computer salesman off.
Ronald starts getting more and more agitated. He is now picking up things in their house that he thinks would be of value to him for the money that Keith owes him.
And that's when the mood changes. Jackie now becomes a little bit agitated, and she tends to tell Ron to stop touching things, leave my property alone.
When Shavonte hears Jackie's hostile tone, her claws come jutting out.
This made Shavonte very angry. The fact that Jackie was yelling at her man.
and she starts to slap or punch Jackie in the face. And at a point, she punches her hard enough to knock her down to the floor.
Ronald is undeterred by the victim's cries for help, as he starts stuffing his duffel bag with CD players, stereos, and as many electronics as he can get his hands on. Meanwhile, Shavante keeps a watchful eye on Jackie, making sure she doesn't try anything foolish.
She's in this now to the end. She's committed, and there is nothing that's going to tear her away from defending her man.
That's when the couple decides it's time to leave Keith's place and go look for the man himself.
Ronald and Shavante led her and forced her to enter their vehicle.
Jackie is certain they'll find Keith and disappear before anyone else gets hurt. Unfortunately, the conniving couple has a more sinister idea of how this night will play out.
The specifics are excruciating to describe. It was a night of horror.
And later, in Cleveland, Ohio, Letitia Santos will also learn that following a bad boy's lead can land you in a world of trouble.
Stefan had a lot of rage, and this rage ended in the most violent.
She thought that this was her knight in shining armor, and then here he is, this crazy lunatic.
Even in the early stages of their relationship, when Ronald and Shavante were taking a break from each other, her lover proved he had a propensity for violence.
Ronald showed up to Shavante's house one day, and Shavante was having sexual relations with another man. He became so angry at that time that he actually beat up this man bad enough where the man ended up in the intensive care unit.
In Omaha, Nebraska, Shavante Green and her boyfriend, Ronald Ford, have kidnapped the girlfriend of Keith Driver, a man they think is stiffing them on payment for a computer. But instead of going to find Keith to get their money, the couple has other plans. They drive back to Shavante, and once they arrive, Ronald grabs Jackie and forces her into the living room.
Once they get into that house, things just escalate even further. At that point, Ronald and Shavante put Jackie into a closet.
Ronald tells his girlfriend to wait in the neighboring bedroom. He then shuts the door behind him and turns his attention to Jackie in the most sadistic way possible.
Ronald told Jackie, "Take your clothes off."
There, he tortures her with reckless abandon.
Where you my chain?
He had sodomized her with the table leg. He put a cigarette butt out on her back. He hit her with a chain, just brutally attacked Jackie for hours in that closet while Shavante was standing by and actually assisting him.
No matter what he asks, no matter what his demands are, I'm going to do whatever it takes to support this man that I love.
When Ronald tires of the vicious assault, he allows his victim to take a bath, as a stoic Shavante looks on.
Shavante had every opportunity to help this woman. She didn't help her. She didn't assist her. She didn't make him stop and make this stop. She did nothing.
But Shavante will have to think fast when she finds out what's playing out across town. Keith has just arrived home, and he's stunned to see the disarray at his place.
It had clearly been gone through quickly. He also immediately knew that his girlfriend was not there. He was concerned about her.
Keith has a sinking feeling he knows who's to blame, given that he owes Ronald money.
So he calls the police immediately. That is possibly over a computer deal that's gone wrong. Now this really gets interesting. Keith leads the police to the residence of Shavante and Teron Ford.
Realizing the jig is up, the lovebirds quickly come up with a story they hope officers will believe.
They put her in Shavante's clothing. If the police asked her anything, Jackie was told that she needed to tell them that her boyfriend Keith beat her up. And these two people, Shavante and Ronald, saved her.
It was a complete act of desperation by dressing up Jackie in Shavante's clothes
Knowing it's her only way of escape, Jackie agrees, and Shavante quickly shoves her out the door, slamming it shut behind her. Immediately, Jackie goes off script.
After Jackie was allowed to leave, she obviously told her boyfriend, Keith, and also the police officers what happened when she was inside.
As Jackie's rushed to the hospital, the door again creaks open and Shavante pokes her head out. Police push their way in and search the house, but can't find her fellow assailant. Just then, officers hear a rustling sound coming from the bedroom.
As they proceed to enter the bedroom, they see a piece of furniture that's in an odd place. They move the furniture and behold, they find Ronald Ford. He's apprehended. He's taken off.
The pair is immediately cuffed and taken into custody. At the PD, they're questioned separately, and the strong bond they once had for each other starts to crumble.
Ronald specifically was indicating that nothing he did was non-consensual. Shavante, on the other hand, she would admit to assisting him, handing him things, or bringing him things, but not in more active participation.
With the deck stacked against them, Shavante pleads guilty to kidnapping, tampering with physical evidence, and second-degree assault. Ronald pleads guilty to kidnapping, first-degree sexual assault, use of a weapon to commit a felony, and second-degree assault.
Shavante was an active participant throughout this night. She never tried to stop what was happening to her and instead took an active role in victimizing this woman. It was an excruciating experience that no one can even imagine enduring at the hands of these two individuals.
For their actions, Shavante is sentenced to 51 to 65 years in prison, while Ronald receives a heftier sentence of 80 to 130 years with the possibility of parole. For Shavante, her quest for love cost her more than just a broken heart.
Shavante lost everything that night by the choices that she made to carry out these acts with Ronald. She lost her family and she lost her freedom.
While incarcerated, Shavante shows little remorse for the heinous crime she helped commit.
Shavante certainly had made some really poor decisions in her life. This perhaps was the worst. All of it because she thought it was about love.
She was under the influence of two things that night: methamphetamines and Ronald Ford.
I can't say where Shavante's life would have taken her without Ronald Ford's influence in it. But that night, Shavante was in that house and did these things that changed this woman's life forever.
Shavante's dreams of having a man all to herself went up in smoke when she followed her heart directly into darkness. And in Cleveland, Ohio, Letitia Santos is also driven to a life of crime by a man who stole her heart. At just 17 years old, Letitia Santos is living a charmed life in Brockton, Massachusetts, just 25 miles south of Boston.
Letitia was an only child. She lived with her mom, my auntie Sandra, and my uncle Manny, and they just spoiled her rotten. They were really good to her.
The high school junior has always kept her nose in a textbook, but these days she's gearing up for life after school with her first true love, Darby Fulcher.
This was the man of her dreams. She was so infatuated with him. They were like the best of friends.
Following graduation, the couple moves in together and over the years welcomes two beautiful children into the world. Though after 7 years of wedded bliss, the storybook romance begins a heartbreaking chapter.
She found out that he was cheating on her, and it broke her heart. After the breakup, she lost her dad. He died of a heart attack. That right there was a big blow for Letitia. She lost two of the most important men in her life.
To cope, Letitia hits the bottle, turning to drugs and alcohol to numb the pain.
When you're rejected as a young woman, it can cause all sorts of emotional damage. All the ideas that you have as to what healthy love is all about is thrown out the window.
And that's when the rest of her world crumbles.
Letitia loses custody of her children because she can't keep them in a stable environment.
Without her kids, her ex, or her deceased father, Letitia is left to wander through life alone. But it doesn't take long for her to grab the hand of a man nearly 700 miles away, who leads Letitia down an even darker path.
Stefan appeared to be someone who would care for Letitia. However, there was another side to him that she didn't know about.
He was just so manipulative that, she just couldn't resist him.
Massachusetts native Letitia Santos is hoping for a fresh start after being dumped by her kid's father and having her children taken away by the state. Fortunately, she has some loving family members in Ohio who welcome her with open arms.
Letitia called me one day and asked if she could come live with me in Cleveland because she needed a new start. She wanted new surroundings so that she could get custody of her children back. That was her main goal. And I was all for it.
Letitia packs her bags and makes the 700-mile trek to the Buckeye State. Over the next 6 months, the young mother on the mend sobers up and gets acquainted with her new surroundings. But finding work without a college degree isn't as easy as she hoped.
It took her a few times to try to get jobs, but she still never laid her foot down on one.
So she falls back on the one thing she has going for her striking good looks.
Letitia was desperate for cash. She knew how to dance. She knew how to work her body, and her attitudes to make money to survive.
So she began to dance at popular clubs near downtown.
Unfortunately, not everyone is excited to see Letitia take center stage.
I said, well, girl, you gotta be careful now because a lot of stuff goes on in strip joints. I said, there's a lot of bad things going around there.
She needed the money, and in her mind, she could be treated like a goddess. And this made her feel really good. It was a self-medication in building up her self-esteem.
But the real trouble begins when she bumps into Stefan Davis, a patron with plenty of dollar bills and even more desire for the club's newest dancer.
He was handsome and he was charming, He had a smile that just lit up the room and it made you feel like, wow, he's a nice guy.
He knew the right things to say. In the Midwest, we call that a mouthpiece.
But Stefan proves to be less than meets the eye.
He portrayed himself as the high roller, but he lived in a basement of his parents' house, and he was often borrowing money from people.
Though bunking with his folks is surely an upgrade from the juvenile penitentiary he called home for 9 years.
Stefan was a very troubled person. He raped a teenager when he was a teenager. He eventually murdered a relative's boyfriend, and he spent time in the penal system. And once he was released as an adult, he was convicted again of selling crack cocaine.
After serving his time, the 24-year-old becomes a regular at the club and now spends all his cash on VIP dances with Letitia. The two become friendly, and Stefan whispers enough sweet nothings to pique the dancer's interest.
Letitia told me that she met a guy that she was really crazy about. I could hear it in her voice that he was the guy who was going to take care of her and help her get her on track.
She had been treated badly. She had significant losses as far as male figures in her life. And she was broke. And here was an opportunity to do much, much better, at least in her own mind.
But after just a few months of dating, his true colors emerge. Not only is he hooked on drugs, Stefan doesn't like Letitia going anywhere without him, or talking to other guys. And when she does, he makes her pay.
It went downhill so quickly. We started seeing bruises on Letitia. She would have black eyes or black and blue marks on her arms.
One day, she came in, and I was like, "What happened to you? Is this guy whooping on you?" She was like this, "No, that was an accident." I said, "Well, accident? Ain't no accident. It's like somebody hit you in your face."
Time and time again, Letitia returns to her man's controlling arms, though she struggles to deal with the continued abuse.
The relationship was really stressful. So she got to a point where, she just threw her hands up and went ahead and started using again, doing the drugs and alcohol.
It's like falling off that wagon and finding the most convenient way to feel better. But at the end of the day, all you end up doing is exacerbating the problem, making it worse with that chemical addiction.
And when she can't figure out where to get her next fix, Stefan decides to use Letitia's dependency to his advantage. It's Easter Sunday, and he has no plans of hunting for eggs. He'd rather go out partying. But Stefan's car is in the shop, and Letitia doesn't own a vehicle. So he buzzes an ex-girlfriend, Alyssa Wagner, to bum some wheels for the night.
What do you borrow your van have to do with you going to work?
She worked a late shift, so it was worked out where Alyssa would go and pick him up, and then they would both drive to her work together, and then he could take the car and have it for as long as he wanted that evening.
After dropping his ex off at work around 6:30, Stefan meets Letitia for a night on the town.
The first thing that the two of them did was go and pick up a bottle of liquor and sit and drink it in the car. They went back multiple times to get just full bottles of liquor and drank it while they were driving around.
Around 1 a.m., things take a chilling turn. Stefan is late to hit the brakes while approaching a red light and rear-ends an SUV driven by 31-year-old Angel Bradley Crockett, who was on her way to meet some friends.
Stefan made several observations about Angel. He noticed that she was very nicely clothed. He also looked at her SUV. It was a high-end SUV.
Intoxicated Stefan is adamant that Angel is at fault, even though he slammed into her and demands payment to fix his vehicle. Angel is terrified by his hostility and offers to throw him a few dollars until they can work this out. But the second she reaches into her handbag, Stefan gets a glint in his eye.
He saw some money either in Angel's wallet or in her purse and thought that she had some money to steal, and so they decided he was going to rob her. Letitia's response to him was, "Okay, why not?"
Stefan drags her to the van, and he tells Letitia to go into Angel's vehicle and to take any items that are of value.
She just was so influenced by Stefan, and so manipulated by him. She had nowhere else to turn.
Following an inebriated fender bender on the streets of Cleveland, Letitia Santos and her boyfriend Stefan Davis have taken the driver of the other car, Angel Bradley Crockett, hostage. And Stefan makes it clear that he wants more than just Angel's dime to pay for the damage. And Letitia is going to help him get it.
Letitia went to Angel's vehicle, looked around, didn't find any money, came back and let Stefan down.
That's when she sees just how enraged her hot-tempered boyfriend has become.
Shut up!
He had Angel in the back. He was demanding oral sex, then demanding sex from her and also beating her at the same time. He was choking her. He was striking her. It was just a vicious beating all around.
Stefan then shifts the rest of his rage onto his girlfriend.
Come on, baby. You love it.
He forced Letitia, after punching her in the mouth, to also have sex with him.
But she had no choice. She was frightened of him. She was frightened for her life.
She had been beaten by him in the past, and when he told her to do something, she did it.
An exasperated Stefan orders Letitia to get dressed and start driving, leaving Angel's SUV behind.
Stefan knew that he could get away with raping Letitia with no problem because he controlled her. But with Angel, he takes it a step further because he knows that Angel would likely call the authorities.
Stefan tells his girlfriend to head for Interstate 90, a familiar road near his mother's house. When they reach the West 44th Street overpass, he tells Letitia to pull over.
As Letitia looked back, she heard the sounds of someone being strangled. She saw that Stefan had a string, like a shoestring, and it was wrapped around Angel's neck.
She knew what he was capable of. However, she, in her wildest imagination, never thought that he could do something so violent. She was still very afraid of Stefan from their past history of domestic violence. But now, with this shocking turn of events, she was immobilized emotionally.
After that, she didn't hear any more sounds from Angel.
With the job done, Stefan opens the van's side door and drags Angel's lifeless body onto the gravel. He hops back inside and demands that Letitia drive to her place to grab some cleaning supplies.
After the two of them were involved in this heinous murder, they tried to bleach the vehicle, the CSI effect.
There was blood everywhere, so they had to get it clean. They had to, at some point, give it back to Alyssa, and they needed to get rid of the evidence.
Letitia was disconnected from what reality was. She was not Letitia. It was just like she was his puppet. Anything that he said she would do.
Satisfied they've covered their tracks, the pair returns to the initial crime scene to retrieve Angel's vehicle. Stefan tells Letitia to get rid of the stolen SUV while he returns the minivan to his ex. Letitia parks the SUV 3 doors down from her cousin's house and strolls home, hoping to avoid any more trouble.
When she walked into the house, she had a white t-shirt that was torn across the collar, and it had like spots of blood on it. I said, "What happened to you?" She said, "I got pushed out of a van." And Stefan pulled me back in. And I said, "Girl, you need to clean yourself up."
Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Alyssa has just finished her night shift. When she arrives home after getting a ride from a coworker, she finds Stefan waiting in the driveway, along with her mangled van.
When she saw the condition of the minivan, she confronted Stefan about the piece of fender that was hanging out underneath it. He really didn't have an excuse. He was defensive. He fought back. He argued with her, and he walked away down the street. And that was the end of it.
But when she looks in the vehicle herself, she gets the shock of her life.
She was upset and certainly was horrified by some of the things that had gone on in the minivan.
I don't understand how someone I thought was so in love with my cousins was such a devil.
During their most desperate times, Stefan would stop at nothing to find ways to pay for his and Letitia's drug addictions.
When she would be at work and there would be men there that wanted to, pay for sex with her, he would tell Letitia to go ahead, and they basically set this guy up to be robbed.
As Letitia Santos hides out at her cousin's place, following an unspeakable murder, her boyfriend, Stefan Davis, returns his ex-girlfriend's van, dented and dinged. While Stefan hoofs it home in a huff, Alyssa decides to peek inside the van's rear compartment, and she's blown away by what's left behind.
She found that it had blood inside of it, and there were pieces of rug that were still in the van when she let Stefan use it that were no longer there. So she certainly suspected that something violent happened in that van, that somebody tried to cover up.
Without thinking twice, Alyssa notifies police, who immediately give her vehicle a once-over. Meanwhile, detectives ask her for some additional information on the van's driver.
So Alyssa decided that she was going to tell the police who was actually using her minivan that evening.
Hoping for an explanation about the blood, detectives quickly uncover a list of Stefan's possible addresses, as well as his known acquaintances, including Letitia. But before detectives get a chance to track either of them down, a call comes in that blows the doors off their investigation.
Around 4:30 a.m., the police responded to the call that there's something on the highway.
The two officers who were dispatched to the scene discovered Angel's body on Interstate 90 in Cleveland.
She was beaten badly. She had abrasions, road rash. She had strangulation marks. Police knew that this was a homicide.
When I heard about it, it really shocked me. I was immediately looking at the both of them. I just had a feeling that they had something to do with that.
As detectives scour the scene to find some kind of connection, Stefan is holed up at his mother's house on the far side of town, while Letitia's still laying low at her cousin's.
The next morning, I tried to get her to tell me something, but she just wouldn't tell me anything. So I kept telling her over and over, well, you need to tell me something, because something happened with you all the way you looked last night. I ain't never seen you like that before. And she's like, don't worry about it.
Following her half-hearted explanation, Letitia disappears and heads over to a friend's house. But she has some explaining to do when another call comes in to dispatchers 3 days after Angel's murder.
Police got a call that Angel's vehicle had been found. And when they went to the area, they noticed that the vehicle had been damaged.
Given that the SUV is found on Charter Avenue, just a few doors down from the home where Letitia's staying, police are certain there's a connection.
All of a sudden, all these cops pulled up in my yard, and they showed me this picture of Stefan. And they said, do you know this guy? And I said, oh, I know him. That's Stefan.
Investigators say they want to speak with the couple regarding a possible murder. So Cedric tells police everything he knows about his housemate's main man and where to find him. However, he's not sure where Letitia is. Just then, Cedric overhears the news that Stefan has just been nabbed at his mama's house.
I heard the radio say, we got him. We got him. I was shocked. Like, oh my God, this can't be real.
The next day, Cedric gets a call from his house guest.
Letitia called me and asked me to cover for her. Wanted me to say I was drinking with her Sunday all night. And I told her I'm not covering for nothing. No one ever. Because there's some serious business here.
Cedric immediately notifies police regarding his conversation with Letitia. However, he has no idea where she was calling from. So they immediately issue a warrant for her arrest. And 9 days later, Letitia turns herself into the local PD.
It wasn't real to find out that it's my cousin that committed this crime, this murder. It was devastating. It tore me apart.
With both suspects finally in custody, police interview them separately. First up is Stefan, who continues his smooth-talking ways.
His statement was that he had nothing to do with it, and neither did Letitia.
Neither did Letitia.
But when detectives sit down with Letitia and present her with the evidence, she doesn't think twice about flipping on her man.
It's Stefan. He's the one that did it.
She certainly was pointing the finger at Stefan Davis as the person who committed this murder.
She was a classic victim of domestic violence. And this was her opportunity to come clean and to finally be free of Stefan, because deep down inside, she knew that they were a deadly combination and he was a person who was extremely dangerous.
Just to know that she has to deal with this in her life as well, it hurts. It hurts. And I just wish things were different.
Letitia exchanges her testimony for a lighter sentence. She pleads guilty to voluntary manslaughter, aggravated robbery, and abuse of a corpse, and is given 10 years in jail. When Stefan hears that his girl gave him up, he pleads guilty to aggravated murder and aggravated robbery. Stefan manages to avoid the death penalty and is sentenced to 40 years behind bars. From her cell, Letitia frequently reaches out to friends and family, hoping they'll one day be able to forgive her for her heinous actions.
She told me she regrets being with him, that he was her worst nightmare.
Letitia has to deal with the consequences from her decisions. She participated in a very brutal crime. And it doesn't matter if she wouldn't have done this if she had never had met Stefan. We all have choices in life, and Letitia made the wrong choice that night.
Because of her choice to be with this man, it cost Letitia her life, a relationship with her children. It cost her a future because she decided to be with this monster. It cost her everything.
It was a case of why did it happen?
York, Pennsylvania, October 12th, 2010. It was 3:49 p.m. when 49-year-old Joanne Helfrich made a desperate call to 911. Joanne told the dispatcher that she had just shot someone. But according to Joanne, as soon as she pulled the trigger, she realized that she'd made a terrible mistake.
Who she shot was actually Fred McClure, her live-in boyfriend. He was laying face down on the floor.
And according to Joanne, he wasn't moving.
She was hysterical and emotional on the 911 call.
Joanne couldn't feel a pulse or couldn't tell if Fred was breathing or not.
Squad cars and an ambulance raced to the scene, while the dispatcher stayed on the line with Joanne.
They asked her to try to roll the body over to perform CPR.
Joanne tried to help, but it was no use.
She was never able to get him rolled onto his back so she could try to resuscitate Fred.
And as the precious seconds ticked away, Joanne became more and more distraught.
She's kept asking, please help me, please help me.
Born in 1961, Joanne Babner spent most of her life in Pennsylvania.
She grew up in the York area. She had a family in York. Her mom and two sisters still live in the area.
York is a mid-sized city, very working class. We had a lot of factories.
Joanne took a series of jobs, working towards an associate's degree between shifts, and by 2002, the friendly 41-year-old was happily married.
Joanne was very outgoing, never had to pull anything out of her. She was very open.
She had very curly hair, which I always said, oh, Joanne, I wish I had hair like you. Always looked very neat, and the prettiest eyes.
But 5 years later, according to Joanne, a freak explosion at her factory job left her traumatized. No one was hurt, but according to Joanne, the shock caused her to shut down emotionally and simply walk away from her life.
When Dad met Joanne, she was basically living in her car.
After shutting out her husband and her family, 46-year-old Joanne had hit rock bottom.
She was between residences. She didn't really have a place to live and was looking for work.
Nearly broke, she had spent several desperate weeks drifting around her hometown. But Joanne's life would turn around from the moment she first met Fred McClure. 10 years older than Joanne, Fred wasn't originally from York.
Fred was born in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania.
But he fit right into the city's hard-knock blue-collar image.
Fred was a motorcycle enthusiast.
In fact, he ended up in York, largely because the factory town is home to one of Harley-Davidson's main assembly plants.
Dad's love of motorcycles led him to York, Pennsylvania, because being mechanically inclined, would work in their motorcycle repair shops, stuff like that, as a mechanic or a helper.
However, working on motorcycles wasn't all Fred did. The grizzled biker had a bit of a checkered past.
My father had some criminal background.
He'd served more than one stint in prison, too.
Some of it was state charges that he had went to prison for when I was younger. And recently were some federal charges.
He did seem kind of like a tough guy. Not the kind of guy you'd want to cross.
But in 2007, after his latest release from prison, it appeared that 56-year-old Fred had finally made a change.
He was aware of the mistakes that he had made, and he had paid for those mistakes and was working real hard.
He worked in a couple factories when he had first come back out of jail, just to get on his feet.
And by the time he met Joanne in 2008, the former felon was working as a maintenance man, doing odd jobs around the apartment complex where he lived.
He'd fixed whatever was broke right away.
It wasn't much, but the tough ex-con appeared to be happy.
The residents all said he was very easy to get along with, that he was a really laid-back guy.
However, being single for more than 20 years, but there was still one thing missing from Fred's life.
He was ugly, he was grumpy.
So when a mutual friend introduced Fred to Joanne, he gladly offered her one of the spare bedrooms in his apartment.
His friend's wife introduced him. Thought maybe they'd hit it all. Explained to Dad that she needed a place to live. Dad, being the good guy he was, hesitated, not a moment.
He would give the shirt off his back if he had to. He was loving, caring.
Although Fred did benefit from their arrangement in a totally platonic way.
Fred was looking for somebody to basically cook, clean, take care of his house.
But Joanne hadn't lived with Fred long before he fell in love with her cooking.
I've never seen anyone who could cook like that. Everything she made was delicious. I'd go to visit for 3 days and come back 10 pounds heavier.
She made peanut butter fudge, and it was good.
I mean, she spoiled you with food. Always.
And within a few months, Fred really was in love.
I guess if you live in close quarters with somebody, after a while, you kind of develop feelings.
Joanne felt the same way too.
It had turned into a romantic relationship.
And the relationship produced a dramatic change in Fred.
It seemed like she made him blossom. I hadn't seen Dad that happy in a long time.
Fred's family was just as happy.
She was great. She was nice.
She was friendly. I mean, she talked to all of us.
And Joanne even seemed to bring Fred closer to his children and grandchildren.
Would call, or he would show up for their birthday parties and stuff like that. So, I mean, he was putting family first.
In fact, Fred's kids and grandkids were so pleased with Joanne's positive influence, they treated her like one of the family.
To my kids, she was right with it. They latched on to her just as if she had been there always.
And in 2009, barely a year after Fred had first offered her a place to stay, it appeared that Joanne would always be there.
Joanne had stated that he was one of the best things that had ever happened to her.
They were crazy in love with each other. They seemed to really get along. They would go for bike rides, and they would hang out with his friends and everything.
But even as Joanne and Fred appeared to settle down, there were always nagging doubts about just how much time they would have together.
He had certain health issues, heart issues.
And despite the fact that he recently had major heart surgery, his health continued to decline.
He needed another surgery.
Joanne did her best to help her ailing boyfriend.
She really did everything she could to take care of Fred.
In 2010, she even took a job to help bring in extra money while Fred recovered.
Joanne worked for PennDOT, Department of Transportation, working in construction zones.
She worked night shifts.
And she would get in probably about 6. She would sleep during the day.
But even with Joanne's extra income, Fred refused to take it easy.
He was happy when he's working on something.
The lifelong biker wasn't about to quit riding either, no matter what his doctors said.
He was the type of guy that didn't take crap from anybody.
And if he died on his bike, his family figured that was how he wanted to go.
I always thought he would die in a motorcycle accident.
I always expected a phone call.
But when the call finally did come, it wouldn't be Fred's motorcycle or his heart that killed him. Coming up, Joanne explains her tragic mistake. And she claims her fear was well founded.
He was in a motorcycle gang.
York, Pennsylvania, October 12th, 2010. It was a little before 4 o'clock that afternoon when 49-year-old Joanne Cuthbert called 911 and reported that she had just shot her boyfriend, Fred McClure. According to Joanne, the shooting was a horrible accident.
Joanne did tell the 911 dispatcher that she thought she shot an intruder, that she didn't realize that she shot Fred. The whole time she's on the phone, she's crying, she's hysterical.
And she was hysterical when officers and EMTs arrived on the scene minutes later.
She was yelling, just please help me.
Inside, the EMTs rushed to aid Fred's identity. The investigators had their doubts.
Upon our arrival, it was bright as could be inside that house, especially right by the living room where she claims she would first encounter the intruder.
Back at Joanne and Fred's apartment, however, the crime scene investigators did find some evidence that appeared to be consistent with Joanne's story.
There were shell casings on the steps, which would have supported initially what she said.
But there were also things that didn't fit what Joanne had told the police.
One of the investigators found discarded shell casings in a trash can, not far from where the body was.
And the .22 caliber casings matched the ones at the top of the stairs.
There was some type of attempt to clean up the crime scene.
Why would you hide spent bullet casings if it was an accident?
And then there were the bullet wounds. When the coroner's team arrived at the apartment to remove Fred's body, they noted that he had been shot a total of 8 times.
He had several wounds that would have been fatal.
Although the wound that most likely killed Fred was to the upper right side of his chest.
The shot to his right upper chest did go through his heart.
The fact that Fred had 8 bullet wounds wasn't exactly surprising. After all, Joanne admitted that she had unloaded her gun on the so-called intruder, a man she supposedly feared was the member of a rival motorcycle gang.
She pulled the trigger until she felt safe.
However, while that might explain the number of Fred's wounds, there was something else Joanne would have a harder time explaining. Something that definitely didn't fit her story.
We had wounds delivered from the front, where she would have been facing him, and also from the back.
Her story didn't add up.
When you compared the evidence that was collected to the statement that Joanne provided to the police, it was very clear that she was being dishonest.
But if Joanne had meant to shoot Fred, one question remained. Why? For answers, the investigators turned to the friends and neighbors gathered outside the police tape.
It was a very tight-knit neighborhood. A lot of neighbors, they all knew Fred, they all knew Joanne.
And for the most part, they were shocked by what had just occurred.
They were all saddened with it. They were shocked to see who we were.
Everyone thought that they had got along, that they were a loving couple.
Well, almost everyone. Some of Joanne and Fred's nearest neighbors in the complex told the investigators that the couple wasn't always as happy as everyone believed.
They could sometimes hear them arguing, but it wasn't a physical argument, it would just be yelling and shouting.
And just what they were shouting about, the neighbors couldn't say.
Neighbors couldn't really tell what they were arguing about, being through the walls.
However, the neighbors had seen both Fred and Joanne on the day of the shooting. Information that could prove immensely valuable to the police.
They told investigators that around 3:30, they noticed that Fred's car lights were on.
So just minutes before the shooting, they had done the neighborly thing and knocked on Fred and Joanne's door.
They notified him his lights were on in his car.
But while it was Fred who answered the door, the neighbors claimed that they had seen Joanne, too, up and awake.
They saw Joanne stick her head out the door while Fred was outside talking to them.
And when they finished talking, according to the neighbors, Fred went back inside the apartment.
Whether she shot him directly when he walked back in, I don't know.
The neighbors didn't know either. They told the police that after talking to Fred, they left to get some food.
The neighbor only went up to Taco Bell. It's right up the street. I could throw a baseball that far.
They were gone for 5-10 minutes before coming back to the apartment complex.
And according to the neighbors, it was during that brief 10 to 15 minutes that Fred had been shot.
When they came back, the first responders were already there.
10 minutes from the neighbor being there, my dad was dead. She never shot him.
If what the neighbors said was true, Joanne's entire story, that she had been sleeping, that she didn't realize that it was Fred who came in, that she thought he was an intruder, was all a lie.
They were both awake. They were both in the house at the time she claimed that she was in bed and this intruder would have come in.
As soon as the investigators at the scene heard the neighbor's story, they passed it along to their counterparts questioning Joanne at the station.
They compared that with the information that Joanne had provided them during the first part of the interview. They saw that it did not make really much sense at all.
We were able to ascertain some discrepancies in her statement.
And once made aware of those discrepancies, the investigators stepped back into the interrogation room where Joanne waited.
The police officers were somewhat more confrontational with her.
But even when confronted, Joanne stuck to her story.
I really didn't think he was an intruder.
We had to tell her, we didn't believe her at that point. Confront her with these inconsistencies of what she was saying and what the crime scene was now telling us.
We know that you were together not too long before the shooting happened in university.
And that wasn't the only lie they called her on either.
You said it was dark in here, but it wasn't.
At first, Joanne appeared shocked by the sudden confrontational turn in the questioning.
She was frightened because she didn't know what was going on.
But as the police continued to push, her behavior shifted radically.
I heard nothing. So if I shoot my wife and she doesn't answer, you don't think I was reckless? You didn't answer my question. No, I'm not answering that question. That's an ignorant question.
She does become angry with them.
The more probing the questions were, the more confrontational she would become.
And it wasn't long after that Joanne said she had had enough. The interview was over.
I try to be honest with you, and what I'm saying to you, you obviously have a different perspective on it. I'm sorry for that.
Basically told her she didn't care. She thought he was an intruder.
The investigators thought differently, of course. And with Joanne refusing to answer any more questions, there was only one thing they could do. Coming up, at trial, the defense produces evidence of a happy couple.
The messages were, I love you, do you need anything?
But the prosecution has some shocking new evidence of its own.
She was unhappy and wanted to leave the relationship.
On November 5th, 2012, at Pennsylvania's York County Courthouse, Joanne Helfrich stood trial for murder. It had been a little more than 2 years since Joanne had dialed 911 and reported that she had just shot her boyfriend, a 59-year-old biker named Fred McClure.
This was never a case of who done it. This was a case of why did it happen?
According to Joanne, the shooting had simply been a tragic accident.
Joanne has always maintained that she believed there was an intruder in her house when she fired that gun.
And now, if the jury found her guilty, the 51-year-old faced the possibility of a stiff penalty.
If she was convicted of first-degree murder, she would receive a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole.
In their opening statement, the prosecution argued that after 2 years together, Joanne was finished with Fred.
She was unhappy and wanted to leave the relationship.
Specifically, the prosecutors claimed that Joanne was unhappy about Fred's involvement with a local motorcycle gang.
The prosecution argued that she didn't like the way she was treated. She is having a hard time with that lifestyle. She had a hard time adjusting to some of the rules and some of the requirements.
In particular, the prosecutors claimed that she objected to the way the gang treated women. Joanne wasn't about to be anyone's property.
She was very outspoken.
But Joanne couldn't just leave Fred and risk being homeless again. And according to the prosecution, her unhappiness and anger finally reached the breaking point on the afternoon of October 12th, 2010.
For whatever reason, the evidence showed that she made a decision to solve the problems that she had with Mr. McClure by shooting him.
Which meant, according to the prosecution, that contrary to what Joanne had told the police, she hadn't been surprised by Fred that afternoon. Instead, they claimed that she surprised him. At some point in that afternoon, she made the decision to basically ambush Fred as he was coming back inside the house.
One of her neighbors reported seeing her outside not too long before the shooting occurred.
The prosecution did agree with at least one aspect of Joanne's story, however.
Joanne had originally told police she was standing on the second floor firing down at Fred.
She was standing on the steps for the first volley of shots.
But after those first shots, the prosecution's version of events began to stray from Joanne's.
The prosecution argued that Joanne walked down the steps and essentially executed Fred.
And to explain why, they called one of the pathologists who had performed Fred's autopsy to the stand. He testified that if Joanne's story were true, if she had stayed at the top of the stairs throughout the shooting, the paths of the bullets through Fred's body would have all been similar. But according to the pathologist, that wasn't the case.
We had different trajectories, which indicated that the bullet trajectory was not fired from the same location.
The ballistics showed that the shooting could not have happened the way Joanne claimed it did.
Most disturbing of all, some of the wounds had an upward trajectory, meaning that Joanne had kept firing after she reached her boyfriend, collapsed in a bloody heap at the bottom of the stairs.
She was probably standing over top of him at that point.
And according to the prosecution, those final shots, the ones that essentially finished Fred off, explained why the investigators had recovered several shell casings in the trash. I argue that showed she was trying to cover up the fact that those casings were found very close to Mr. McClure's body, which would suggest that she fired down into his body as he was laying defenseless on the ground.
She stood over my dad, 2 foot away, with Bible in his back.
Exactly why Joanne would shoot Fred, the prosecutors couldn't say.
Prosecutors were never able to determine a motive for the shooting.
I have a feeling that the way they argued, and the way she always bucked up doing, I'm sure he asked her.
One thing was certain, however, Joanne's reaction to the prosecution's vivid and potentially damning account of Fred's death.
She broke down. She was visibly shaking, crying.
And when the defense started presenting its case on November 8th, she was running out of options. Despite the allegation that Fred was a member of a motorcycle gang, there was no way Joanne's attorneys could put the victim on trial and claim that the shooting was actually self-defense. Joanne was asked during her interview with the police whether there was any kind of abuse in their relationship, and she denied any kind of abuse or domestic violence.
I've never been a man.
You can't come back later and say, oh, by the way, he was always beating me, he was always hitting me. You're locked into that first initial statement.
And when they started presenting her case, Joanne's attorneys were just as locked on to her initial statement.
She never tried to come up with another story, another justification for what she did. She maintains it was just an accident, just a mistake.
And they were willing to stake their entire case on it.
We didn't call any witnesses.
Not even Joanne.
With Joanne's emotional state during the trial, she wasn't comfortable testifying.
Instead, Joanne's attorneys opened their defense by admitting that Joanne should have identified.
But her beliefs were unreasonable at the time. It was her reckless, negligent act that caused his death, not an intentional act.
After all, her attorneys asked, why would Joanne want to kill Fred when she had no clear motive to do so?
Joanne had no reason to do this. There was never a financial motive. Neither Fred nor Joanne had much money. I don't believe Fred had any life insurance policies, and if he did, I think they would have gone to his kids because him and Joanne were never married.
And if she had wanted to leave Fred, as the prosecution contended, there was nothing stopping her.
She didn't have to shoot. She could just left. It doesn't make sense. If you really want to leave, get in your car and go.
Not that Joanne wanted to leave, according to the defense. And then Joanne's attorneys presented the jury with cell phone and text message records that they said supported their claim.
There were messages from Robert that day to Fred and Joanne showing that they were happy. The messages were, I love you, are you okay, how is everything, do you need anything? They were very loving.
At trial, Joanne's attorneys argued that had there been a problem, it would have come up, and the messages were perfectly normal.
Most of all, however, the defense relied on Joanne's 911 call and her statement after the shooting.
It was their contention that you just had to listen to Ms. Helfrich in the 911 call. You had to listen to her in her interview. You could hear the emotion in her voice, and it was not the emotion of somebody who had intended to kill somebody.
Coming up, Joanne's fate is revealed.
The jury came back with a verdict in less than an hour.
And she makes a surprising request.
She asked the judge if she could face us.
On November 8, 2012, Joanne Helfrich sat in a York, Pennsylvania courtroom, awaiting the verdict in her murder trial. Accused of intentionally shooting her boyfriend, Fred McClure, the 51-year-old faced the possibility of life without parole. But she didn't seem especially nervous while the jury deliberated her fate.
Joanne was confident. She was at peace with whatever the jury decided the verdict was going to be. We presented what she felt needed to be presented, and she was happy with what we did.
Although privately, her lawyers admitted that an outright acquittal was a long shot.
We were looking for a compromise verdict, whether it be third or voluntary.
Whatever the outcome, at least Joanne wouldn't have long to wait.
The jury came back with a verdict in less than an hour.
We didn't even get downstairs and out of the courthouse for a breath of fresh air before they were calling us back to say that they had already reached a verdict.
And when that verdict was read, it quickly became apparent that Joanne's confidence and her attorney's hopes had been misplaced. The jury found her guilty of first-degree murder.
It wasn't surprising to me because of the overwhelming preponderance of the evidence.
Joanne, however, did appear surprised, even shocked.
Joanne was visibly upset. She didn't really say much. She just sort of hung her head.
Although by November 26, 2012, when the judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, Joanne appeared resigned to her fate and had the last word.
She asked the judge if she could face us because she wanted to make a statement, and he said, go ahead.
She apologized for what happened that night.
However, while Joanne may have apologized for shooting Fred, she remained defiant too, despite the fact that a jury had found her guilty of his murder.
She just wanted to let them know that, again, she didn't intend to kill Fred. It was an accident.
It really infuriated not only myself, but the rest of my family.
I told her. Plain and simple. You're a murderer. You killed somebody on purpose.
But while the family felt Joanne's sentence was just, that didn't make the fact that she was going away for life any easier to take.
I was kind of upset. I mean, this isn't like you get out of and call mom. What if you're out of it?
Marjorie Orbit was a glamorous Vegas showgirl.
Blonde, tall, long legs, great figure.
And she gave it all up to be the wife of a wealthy Phoenix art dealer.
Trades her feather boas in for floral print aprons.
But then her husband mysteriously disappeared.
He just all of a sudden went missing.
The family was frantic.
And the resulting investigation would be packed with drama.
They had the SWAT team make entry.
Hinge on a shocking discovery.
It was just a torso. Who had no arms.
And bear all the former showgirl's secrets.
Marjorie, this insatiable creature, we were all wondering what would happen next.
2004. It was a little after 1 o'clock that Saturday afternoon when a construction worker enjoying his day off tramped across a barren patch of undeveloped scrub just off busy Dynamite Boulevard.
At the time, it was just a desert area, kind of surrounded to the west and to the north by residential communities.
And a network of dirt trails crisscrossed it.
It was a shortcut through the desert from his trailer to some commercial businesses.
The construction worker bought a six-pack of beer from a convenience store on the commercial strip, and then, walking back to his trailer, paused in the scrub to crack one open.
He thought it was a perfect chance to just sit down and enjoy the desert.
Looking around, he found what he figured would be the perfect place, too. An old trash pile topped by a ripped-up piece of carpet.
Looks like it's pretty sturdy, and he's just kind of taking in the beauty of the day, and he starts wondering, what is it that I'm sitting on?
He pulled off the carpet and discovered a tub.
It was a Rubbermaid storage container, wrapped in plastic.
He's curious, what's inside. He thinks he might have found something of value.
Slicing through the plastic with a bit of broken glass, he quickly revealed the lid.
He's probably thinking, maybe he discovered a treasure trove.
But when he lifted the lid, those hopes were immediately, horribly dashed.
A putrid stench tears away at his nostrils.
But as sickening as the smell was, it was nothing compared to what he saw inside the tub. Human remains. Even more horrifying, it wasn't a whole body.
It's just a chunk of the human body, the midsection of a human being.
It was a gory and horrifying discovery.
And it would also turn out to be the crucial clue to solve an almost 2-month-old mystery involving a wealthy art dealer, a bodybuilder, and a former Vegas showgirl named Marjorie Orban. Born in 1961, Marjorie Ann Crow grew up in the small town of Altamont Springs, Florida. But from a very early age, she dreamed of something bigger.
She was very much attracted by, bright lights, big city.
She spent much of her youth honing the skills to make her escape.
From an early age, she showed a talent for dance, kind of with a lifetime passion for her.
And by the time she was a teenager, Marjorie was pretty good at exciting other people's passions, too.
Marjorie was always a natural beauty, and from an early age, she was just a head turner. Blonde, tall, long legs, great figure.
However, for all her glamorous dreams, Marjorie also harbored a more traditional ambition, to be a mother. But it wasn't to be.
When Marjorie was 16, she learned devastating news that she was not able to have children.
The news produced a dramatic change in the teenager.
Because she was told she'd never be a mother, she decided she would live her life only for herself.
But that didn't mean Marjorie wanted to live by herself.
She so badly wanted love and to fill this sort of void in her life that she bounced from these relationships from one to the next.
At 25, Marjorie had already been married 3 times and left her hometown far behind.
Her third husband convinced her to move out to Las Vegas with them.
It was in Vegas that Marjorie found what would become her calling.
Marjorie uses her skills as a dancer to start working as a showgirl.
Marjorie loves attention. She loves being on stage. She loves strutting around and showing off.
She loved people looking at her.
But in 1985, the 25-year-old's time in the spotlight came to a sudden and disappointing end. After her third husband gambled away all her earnings, Marjorie left him and Vegas behind.
She packs up the few belongings that she has and she takes off.
She only got as far as Phoenix before her car broke down. And short of funds and getting desperate, it wasn't long before the former Vegas showgirl found a way to get by.
She decides to start working as a stripper.
It wasn't exactly Vegas, but it was still a thrill.
She really thrived off of the male attention she got.
And one of the men giving her attention was Jay Orban. 2 years older than Marjorie, in 1985, Jay was an up-and-coming salesman.
Jay had a wonderful way of making a connection with people, and that served him well in sales.
And from the first dollar he slipped into her G-string, he worked hard to close the deal with Marjorie.
Jay was extremely persistent in his pursuit of Marjorie and would just keep going back and talking to her more and more and really charmed her.
But Jay's charm wasn't enough to keep Marjorie in Phoenix. Once she had earned enough money, she hit the road again, eventually eventually landing back in her home state of Florida.
When Marjorie returns to Florida, she then takes a strip club job at the Dollhouse in South Florida.
She also became romantically involved with the club's owner, a millionaire strip club mogul named Michael J. Peter.
He is the one who invented the concept, basically, of the gentleman's club. And he had clubs all over the world, and he had mansions.
For the next few years, Marjorie enjoyed the extravagant lifestyle that went along with being Peter's girlfriend.
Fur coats, diamonds, jewelry, designer handbags, a yacht, a private jet. That is the lifestyle she experienced with Michael J. Peter.
They were actually on an episode of Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous.
Although from Marjorie's perspective, there was one problem.
He couldn't be faithful.
And considering his line of work, he had no shortage of opportunities either.
He was surrounded by naked girls constantly.
Frustrated by her boyfriend's cheating, Marjorie eventually left Michael and Florida behind.
She decided that she couldn't stay in Florida anymore, and she returns to Vegas.
And by 1993, she was back to working as a showgirl and looking for a new man.
Marjorie lived all her relationships perpetually in the honeymoon period, and when one didn't work out, she went to the next guy.
Although in this instance, the next guy was actually a repeat. It was in 1994 that a sales trip to Vegas brought Jay Orban back into Marjorie's life.
He was on his sales route, driving along the highway, and saw her picture on a billboard, wearing a Vegas outfit, you know, the big feathers and glitter and all that.
And despite the fact that he hadn't seen her in almost a decade, he immediately recognized the stripper that had made such an impression on him back in Phoenix.
He calls her, and he tells her he's been searching for her all these years, and that she's the love of his life and the one that got away.
And by now, the formerly up-and-coming salesman had a whole lot more going for him.
Jay is, at this point, a wealthy Phoenix art dealer. He's very successful.
Money wasn't all Jay offered her, however.
She wanted a family. Jay said, I'll give that to you.
Jay tells her that if you just come back with me, I will do whatever it takes. We'll explore every avenue to have a child together.
It was a tempting offer for the 33-year-old showgirl and stripper.
She realizes that now that she's approaching her mid-30s, that this isn't going to work long-term for her.
And so in 1995, Marjorie married Jay Orban at the Little White Wedding Chapel in Las Vegas, and she left her life as a showgirl behind.
She trades her feather boas in for floral print aprons and becomes a perfect Phoenix suburban housewife.
Whether it was love or simply the security that Jay offered was tough to say. But either way, Marjorie seemed happy.
I don't see any urge in her to want to go back to the stripping life.
But Marjorie did want more. She wanted to be a mother. And thanks to recent medical breakthroughs and Jay's money, she had a chance to get her wish.
They spent over $100,000 to go through these in vitro fertilization procedures.
The investment paid off. In August of 1996, Marjorie finally gave birth to a son.
When they finally got their son, it was like a miracle baby. And for both Marjorie and Jay, they doted on their little boy. He was their entire world.
Although, as time passed, Jay's thriving business meant that he had to spend more and more time away from home.
Jay was an independent salesman. He owned his own business, and 2 weeks out of every month, he traveled throughout the country.
He's really successful, but he's gone a lot.
Which meant Marjorie and the baby spent lots of time alone.
She starts devoting all her time and energy into being the perfect mom, having the perfect house.
And having the perfect body, too. The former stripper and showgirl worked extra hard to maintain the figure that had once graced a Vegas billboard.
Marjorie was obsessed with the gym and obsessed with working out, and she went there for several hours each day.
Which meant that whenever Jay was around, like in August of 2004, when he came home to celebrate their son's 8th birthday, it looked as if the couple had a life to be envied.
Jay, Marjorie, family and friends, everybody's having a good time. They love each other.
And less than a month later, on September 8th, Jay was due back in Phoenix for yet another birthday celebration.
September 8th was Jay's 45th birthday.
But what Jay Orban didn't know as he drove back to Phoenix that Wednesday was that his 45th birthday would be his last. Coming up, Marjorie reports her husband missing.
The family was frantic.
But is she all that worried about finding him?
She wasn't really hopeful.
December 22nd, 2004, 42-year-old Marjorie Orban called the Phoenix police to report her husband, Jay, missing.
She said that her husband was expected home on Monday, which was just a couple days earlier, and she hadn't seen him and she was beginning to get worried.
According to Marjorie, the 45-year-old art dealer had been traveling on business.
Margie kind of explained that Jake was a traveling salesman. He was gone for 2 or 3 weeks and he'd come back for a couple weeks.
She claimed she had talked to him a few days before, but since then he hadn't been answering his phone, and she hadn't been able to reach him.
At first, the report appeared routine, but then when a missing persons detective followed up with Marjorie 2 days later,
The behavior was not really that of someone who was desperately worried about someone who was missing.
mostly because, as Marjorie told the detective, she wasn't quite convinced that Jay really was missing.
She said his phone's not working.
Said, he's doing fine, just very busy.
So why had she called the police? According to Marjorie, it was because Jay's elderly parents kept pestering her, wondering why they hadn't heard from him.
It just kind of seemed that Marjorie was just making this report just to kind of satisfy the family.
Marjorie wasn't worried, though. In fact, she told the detective that Jay was bound to turn up sooner or later.
She seems really cool, completely unconcerned about her husband's disappearance.
Marjorie's lack of concern didn't just strike the investigator as odd. When she followed up with Jay's family, it suddenly seemed suspicious. They told the police that Jay hadn't been missing for a couple of days. He had been missing a couple of weeks. According to Jay's elderly parents, they had last spoken to their son on September 8th, his birthday.
He calls his mom and dad, they wish him happy birthday.
Jay's parents also claimed that during the call, their son had made plans to see them later that day.
He was going to make it back into town to celebrate with his family.
But according to his parents, Jay had never showed.
He just all of a sudden went missing.
At least that's what his parents thought. But they said that when they called Marjorie looking for Jay, she told them not to worry. According to his parents, Marjorie told them that Jay had decided to be coming home because their 8-year-old son was down with strep.
He was going to grab some more merchandise.
Looking forward to celebrating their son's birthday, Jay's parents said they had been disappointed, but they also said they had believed Marjorie's story.
She had said that he called her and said, he's doing fine.
When he gets back, everybody will hear from him again.
But that was the thing, according to Jay's parents. That happy birthday call was the last time they had talked to their son.
Jay talked to his parents all the time, so when they didn't hear from him for a few weeks, they started becoming very alarmed.
Maybe he was wrong. Careful blood, high dollar jewelry with him.
In fact, it wasn't just Jay's parents who were starting to worry.
His business associates were starting to call in. Orders would be in place, orders were late. Nobody could actually get him on the phone.
Well, no one but Marjorie, apparently. For most of September, whenever Jay's family or business associates left a message for the missing man, Marjorie would return the call.
She kept saying he was back out of town and she had been in contact with him and she had talked to him daily. So something just wasn't adding up.
And as the days continued to pile up with no word from Jay, Marjorie's explanations had started to wear thin.
The family was frantic. No one has heard from Jay in 10 days, 12 days, 2 weeks.
Jay's family began to ask questions. Marjorie, where is he?
Jay's parents are pushing for Marjorie to file a missing persons report, and finally the pressure gets to her and she relents and calls the police.
But then, once she called the police,
she wasn't really helping. She was almost kind of standoffish.
And when the missing persons detective spoke to her on September 28th, after numerous unreturned calls, Marjorie was rude.
It did not go very well. Marjorie was not pleased to be hounded by a detective.
They have a confrontation over the phone.
And in that confrontation, Marjorie essentially told off the detective.
Marjorie actually says a phrase like, do I have to tell you everything, like including the color of my toenails?
The investigator didn't back down, however. Instead, she made a request, one that basically put Marjorie on notice that the police suspected there was more to her husband's disappearance than she had led them to believe.
Marjorie was asked to take a lie detector test.
But when the investigator asked her about coming in for a polygraph, Marjorie wasn't the only one who answered.
On the phone with detectives, Marjorie starts talking to someone in the background. That person a male voice could be heard telling the detective to go F herself.
Who was the mysterious man in the background? Marjorie didn't say. In fact, she hung up the phone and stopped talking altogether.
Marjorie stopped returning the detective's phone calls.
Not that it mattered. Her suspicious behavior and the fact that there was a mysterious man in her house were enough for a search warrant.
They had the SWAT team make entry.
They actually had the battering ram that battered Marjorie's front door down and came storming in.
And just inside the front door, the SWAT team found Marjorie waiting with a man, presumably the same one who had told off the missing persons investigator.
This big, burly man rushes towards detectives.
Marjorie was standing behind him, and it was as if he were protecting her.
Like he said, take out the SWAT team.
Not that he ever got the chance. The man had barely taken a step before one of the SWAT officers tased him.
Dropped him to the ground. Blood all over the tire. That's what it's exactly.
Marjorie is panicked. She's screaming. The officers are leveling automatic weapons at her face.
And when the SWAT team asked just who the man bleeding all over Marjorie's front hall was, she told the police that they had just tased her boyfriend.
The plot thickens.
While one team of investigators searched Marjorie's house, another questioned the former showgirl and her boyfriend.
They weren't charged with anything, and they were questioned.
During her interview, Marjorie was as difficult as ever and extremely upset about how the SWAT team had just barged in and tased her boyfriend.
Marjorie's demeanor was very defensive, like, what's going on? You know, I didn't do anything wrong.
Marjorie's boyfriend proved more cooperative, however. He told the investigators that his name was Larry Weisberg.
Larry Weisberg was a 60-year-old amateur bodybuilder.
He was physically fit. He was in good shape.
He told the police that he had met Marjorie a few months earlier.
They worked out at the same gym.
And according to Larry, they had been dating for a while.
They built a relationship and eventually just kind of expanded and moved rather quickly. Larry eventually started staying the weekends over at the house.
And based on the timeline Larry gave them, he started staying the night well before Jay disappeared.
Larry Weisberg was Marjorie's boyfriend while she was out of town.
But according to Larry, that didn't mean he knew what had become of Marjorie's missing husband.
Larry claims to have no knowledge that Jay went missing, and he had anything to do with Jay's disappearance.
In fact, Larry claimed he had no idea that Marjorie and Jay were still married.
He just told Marjorie that she was divorced from Jay and she lived in the house and Jay had his own separate place.
They only have a friendly relationship where he stops by every once in a while just to see his son.
And based on what the investigators searching Marjorie's house found, Larry just might have been telling the truth. When they went through the house that evening, the investigators did find a few traces of Jay, although they had to look hard to find them.
Photos from the frames on the wall had been removed. Jay's clothes had been put in boxes and stored in the attic.
But did that necessarily mean anything?
There's a missing person. We don't know if there's a homicide. It's very possible that Jay was holed up in a hotel somewhere, alive and well.
Although, based on what they found in Marjorie and Jay's garage, the investigators were beginning to have their doubts.
The garage had been freshly painted. The floor had been covered with an epoxy coat.
Did the fresh paint and epoxy cover up a crime scene? The police were certainly starting to suspect as much.
Pretty honestly, missing persons to an active homicide investigation.
It would take more than a gut feeling for an arrest warrant, however. So that night, after questioning Marjorie and Larry, the investigators had little choice but to let them go.
There was nothing to charge her with at that point.
But over the next few weeks, the investigators kept a close eye on the former showgirl and her bodybuilder boyfriend.
The two of them killing together. What is his role?
The investigators also dug into Marjorie's financials and made an interesting discovery.
But the last time the family heard from Jay, the next day, all of a sudden, Marjorie is making a lot of cash withdrawals from him.
She had been withdrawing $500 from the bank every single day.
And she was using her credit cards even more than her ATM cards.
She had gone on these shopping sprees, buying clothing, jewelry. She bought a fountain for the front of her house, ran player piano.
Even more suspicious, in the first few days after Jay's disappearance, She purchased a massive amount of cleaning supplies.
Hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of cleaning supplies. Acetone, acid washers, Clorox, mops.
Coming up, the police are summoned to a grisly find.
There was no head. There was no arms.
But is it Marjorie's missing husband?
Inside the bloody pants pockets are a set of car keys. At 1:30 p.m. on October 23rd, 2004, the Phoenix Police Department received a disturbing 911 call about a gruesome discovery in the North Phoenix desert. It's a torso sliced from right above the belly button and below the knee, still clothed in a pair of bloody denim jean shorts. A construction worker had chanced upon the remains. They had been stuffed in a plastic storage container and dumped in a vacant lot on the city's north side.
He was walking up to the local convenience store just to get something to drink, and when he returned, he came back through the desert and he decided to stop and kind of enjoy his beverage of choice.
And when his curiosity got the better of him, he decided to look inside the container. He's terrified. He runs to the nearest grocery store and calls the police. Homicide investigators were on the scene within minutes.
It's a homicide investigation because you don't end up cut up because you died sweetly in your bed.
But while it was obviously a homicide, identifying the remains wouldn't be so easy.
It was just a torso. There was no head. There was no arms.
And that left the investigators little to go on.
It looked like it was a middle-aged white male.
That afternoon, the investigators transported the container full of remains to the county morgue.
We had the entire container removed to the medical examiner so that we could do further examination with the medical examiner's assistance to preserve and collect any evidence.
They conducted the autopsy 2 days later, but the dismembered remains didn't yield much. But what they did would prove to be important.
Inside the bloody pants pockets are some money and a set of car keys.
Ford keys, to be exact. At the time, the homicide detective investigating the body in the storage bin didn't know just how significant that discovery would be. But once he left the morgue and returned to the police station, things would quickly change.
In the evidence room, as I'm going through the keys and kind of separating the money and counting it and itemizing what we have, there were some other detectives in the room at the time working on a complete separate case.
A missing persons case. And when Detective Barnes described how he just found a set of Ford keys on an unidentified body in the storage bin, the missing persons investigator did a double take. That same day, the investigator had made a find as well, an abandoned Ford Bronco.
The Ford Bronco was found in a neighborhood just east of where Marjorie and Jay's residence was, parked on the side of the road.
But incredibly, it was that easy. The Bronco was Jay's.
They took the keys, turned the ignition turnaround.
I didn't know this just happened. 30 minutes ago, we had no idea who this person was, and now we have this person's vehicle.
That evening, the investigators shared news of the discovery with Jay's family, who had more information for the investigators, too.
About a week before Jay's remains were found, Marjorie was starting to inquire about how she could get her hands on the life insurance policy.
The insurance company had told her that collecting on Jay's life insurance would take one of two things. Either his body would have to be found, or she would have to get him declared legally dead, which took a long time.
Marjorie finds out that if the body doesn't turn up, she won't be able to collect the insurance money for 7 years.
And Marjorie opted for a shortcut. It certainly sounded plausible to the police.
A week later, Jay's remains were found out in the desert, a couple miles from her home.
On November 13th, Marjorie used Jay's credit cards to run some errands, but the accounts had been flagged by the investigators.
Police were called. They detained her, arrested her for fraud at that point.
When the police brought her in, they questioned Marjorie about the remains they had found, and she didn't appear surprised or even shocked by the gruesome pictures of what was most likely her husband's
the can, and they suddenly flip this horrendous photo at her, and she acts upset, but she never spills the drink.
She just didn't seem to react the way you think somebody would.
But was there an innocent reason for her indifference? Early on in her interview, Marjorie stunned the investigators by announcing that she and Jay were divorced.
This was a surprise to everybody. Jay didn't tell his parents, didn't tell his brother.
According to Marjorie, she and Jay had been divorced for the past 7 years.
There is a reason why the divorce is not a problem. They had divorced because of a financial problem with one of her previous husbands. I haven't heard my husband against you.
According to Marjorie, she wanted to protect Jay.
I don't have to put all of his assets at risk for him to have to pay something he didn't do.
But Marjorie also told them that even though they divorced for financial reasons, the romance had faded too.
Her sexual relationship with Jay was virtually non-existent. They had more of a friendship, working partnership, domestic, for raising the child.
And finally, Marjorie admitted that whenever Jay was out of town, which was often, she had hooked up with other men like Larry Weisberg. But according to Marjorie, the police shouldn't read too much into the fact that she was secretly seeing Larry. And for the moment, the police still couldn't prove otherwise. So after grilling her for several hours, they let her go a second time.
She was released on her own recognizance, and we didn't have any reason to hold her.
However, now that the investigators knew Jay's body had been dumped in a storage container, it wasn't long before they took a second, closer look at the long list of cleaning supplies that she had purchased shortly after Jay's disappearance. And one transaction immediately caught their eye.
One was a purchase at Lowe's, several bottles of cleaning supplies, several mops, and 2 containers.
50-gallon Rubbermaid containers, just like the one that held Jay's remains. And when they went to the store and pulled their security camera footage,
detectives find video of Marjorie purchasing Jay's plastic coffin, the big blue Rubbermaid container that his body was found in.
The SKU number for the barcodes was the same exact barcode number that we found Jay's remains in.
However, while the video and sales receipts seemed to indicate that Marjorie had helped dispose of Jay's body, did that mean the former Vegas showgirl had killed him? After all, there was still one wild card in play, her bodybuilder boyfriend.
Larry's behavior with police was very aggressive, very violent, and he immediately drew suspicions to himself.
The investigators spent several weeks trying to build a case against Larry, and failed.
It was corroborated by outside sources that he didn't know he was the other man. Larry thought he was the boyfriend of the divorced woman, and that everything he was doing was on the up and up, and there's no evidence to the contrary.
However, the case against Marjorie was getting stronger. On December 1st, the DNA test on the corpse in the storage container confirmed what the investigators had long suspected.
The DNA did confirm that it was Jay.
With no evidence that Larry was involved, there was only one thing left to do. On December 6th, the detectives were on Marjorie's doorstep with another warrant, an arrest warrant.
She opened the door for us, and it was at that point that we placed her under arrest.
Marjorie didn't put up much of a fight. She calmly put her hands behind her back. She was placed in the back of the squad car, and then she was taken away.
Coming up, the prosecution calls a parade of ex-lovers to the stand.
Marjorie is this insatiable creature.
And Marjorie's defense team offers a startling new account of Jay's death.
That's where the cover-up begins.
On January 29, 2009, Marjorie Orban stood trial for murder in Phoenix, Arizona. The 47-year-old former stripper and Vegas showgirl was accused of killing and dismembering her ex-husband, Jay Orban.
His head's still missing. It's very, very troubling.
And if convicted, the gruesome nature of the crime could have serious repercussions for Marjorie.
Marjorie certainly was up against the death penalty. She was fighting for her life.
Not that Marjorie appeared all that worried when she sat down at the defense table that morning.
She was extremely cold, very unemotional, almost like an ice princess.
However, according to the prosecution's opening statement, it was that same cold, icy nature that enabled Marjorie to callously murder Jay, carve up his body, and casually toss his remains in the desert.
She was done with Jay, she was tired of him, and she was going to get rid of him.
And Marjorie could do it, according to her bodybuilding ex-boyfriend, Larry Weisberg. After Marjorie's arrest, Larry had agreed to testify for the prosecution.
Larry was provided with an immunity agreement to where his testimony, anything he said, would not be used against him.
When he took the stand, Larry still denied any direct knowledge of Jay's murder. But he did testify that his former lover and workout partner was physically capable of the crime.
Larry testified that she was very strong, she was very physically fit. It was impossible for her to move the body by herself.
She had been bench pressing weights, had been working out every day, almost preparing for some sort of, physical excursion. The prosecution painted it that she was training to race Jay and get rid of his body.
The former boyfriend's testimony wasn't exactly earth-shattering. Instead, the real shock occurred when the prosecutors called a woman named Sophia Johnson to the stand. Sophia was Marjorie's cellmate at the Maricopa County Jail, and according to Marjorie's attorney, the two women were also lovers.
Marjorie was this insatiable creature. She carried on lots of lesbian affairs, and she always had to have someone in her life. When she was removed from having the ability to have those relationships with men, she had them with women.
In her testimony, Sophia denied that she and Marjorie were lovers. But she did claim that they had become close friends while they were incarcerated together.
Sophia was the key witness against Marjorie in this case because it was months and months of Sophia being there as her friend and listening.
And according to Sophia, she had heard plenty from her friend.
She learned some certain information regarding the case.
She said that Marjorie talked about killing, dismembering her husband.
It was a major piece of evidence. It was a confession from Marjorie.
Hoping to cut a deal on the charges she faced, Sophia had started cooperating with the authorities and had even tried to help them recover the missing portion of Jay's remains.
At one point, Sophia asked, "What'd you do with the rest of him?" And Marjorie said she fed him to the dogs.
Of course, when it came time for cross-examination, the defense did its best to capitalize on the fact that Sophia was trying to trade information on Marjorie for a reduced sentence.
She would say anything just to get out of two.
And the fact that their case hinged on a jailhouse snitch wasn't the only problem the prosecution faced either.
The prosecutor had some medical problems that just put him out for good, and so they were halfway through his trial, and they could either just throw the whole thing over and start over again, or they could put someone in to sort of rescue the whole affair, and they went with that option.
The result was a 2-month delay and a new prosecutor. And when the defense started presenting its case on June 16th, it quickly became clear that they had put the break to good use. In their open, the defense had an entirely new story for the jury, one that let Marjorie off the hook for murder and supposedly identified Jay's real killer.
Larry Weisberg was the individual that actually killed Jay Orman. The story was Jay came home, Jay and Larry had a confrontation. Larry killed Jay by shooting him. I don't think that it was intentional, it was accidental, probably.
According to the defense, it was also Larry, not Marjorie, who dismembered Jay's body and dumped it in the desert.
Larry tells Marjorie not to come out to the garage, and he spends a day in the garage cleaning up the scene, doing something with the body, and leaves in the green Ford Bronco.
And that's where the cover-up begins. Marjorie knows that Jay has been killed, but she doesn't say anything.
And the defense claimed that she didn't say anything because she feared crossing her bodybuilder boyfriend.
Marjorie said that Larry threatened her, and Marjorie kept the whole thing a secret to protect her family and because she was scared.
Marjorie wouldn't say it directly to the jury, however.
She never testified in court.
Instead, the defense's star witness was yet another of Marjorie's former lovers, the millionaire strip club mogul who'd given Marjorie her start, Michael J. Peter.
Michael kept contact with Marjorie even after Marjorie had married Jay.
Not only did he stay in contact, Peter testified that he had always been willing to take Marjorie back, too. And according to the defense, Having a millionaire sugar daddy to fall back on meant that Marjorie had no motive for murder.
Michael basically came in and said, if she wanted money, all she had to do was call me.
Coming up, Marjorie awaits her fate.
We were all wondering what would happen next.
And the jury makes a quick decision.
The jury only deliberated for 6 hours.
On September 14, 2009, the jury announced that it had reached a verdict in the murder trial of Marjorie Orban. The 47-year-old former Vegas showgirl was accused of killing her husband, Jay Orban, dismembering his body, and dumping his remains in the desert outside Phoenix, Arizona.
It was an absolutely heinous crime. It was cold-blooded.
If convicted, Marjorie faced stiff consequences.
She was up for the death penalty. We were all absolutely wondering what would happen next.
And they wouldn't have long to wait.
The jury only deliberated for 6 hours before coming back with a definitive verdict.
They found Marjorie guilty of first-degree murder. Marjorie showed little emotion when the verdict was read.
Marjorie kind of looked up at the ceiling and sighed, and her eyes got a little misty, but then she quickly seemed to recompose herself.
Jay's family, on the other hand, didn't try to hide their relief.
When they heard that verdict, guilty, yes, there was a sense of, we can breathe now. We can breathe now. She won't come back.
But even though the family had hoped for a guilty verdict, they didn't want the mother of Jay's 13-year-old son to end up on death row.
Jay's family didn't want Marjorie to get the death penalty.
And when the jurors handed down Marjorie's sentence on September 30th, they respected the family's wishes and gave her life without parole.
She will sit in prison every day for the rest of her life. She will be there until her hair turns gray and time has erased all trace of beauty from her face. And in the end, I think that's the only loss Marjorie actually cares about.
And for many involved in the case, Marjorie deserves that and more, considering how callously she disposed of her husband.
How can a wife do this to a husband? How can you do these gory things to someone that was kind to you?
Because it's her mother. July 23rd, 2009, Fairfield, New Jersey. It was a typical morning in this bedroom community of 8,000, 40 minutes from Manhattan.
It's a nicer suburb. Fairfield is a quiet, small town where, you raise a family.
Somewhere where, obviously, you'd want to live.
But for one Fairfield family, their quiet suburban existence was about to be shattered. At 9:20 a.m., the local 911 center received a worried call requesting an ambulance.
Want to hear what I took from? My wife is not her mother before. Does she conscious? I didn't. I don't think so. Does she breathe?
First responders raced to the scene.
Less than 10 minutes. They were there.
And when they arrived, they found the caller, Christopher Money, and his wife, Tina, waiting anxiously outside the entrance to her mother's apartment.
It was a basement apartment of the home, and she's very independent.
Tina did check in with her mother most mornings, however, and that morning, according to what Tina told the police, she had found the 81-year-old Marie Zombie collapsed on the floor.
He was flying, non-circle, and Chris showed our officer where Mrs. Zombie's body was.
And when an officer checked the elderly woman face down on the floor for a
She was rather cold to the touch.
There was blood around her head, too, although that didn't necessarily mean the 81-year-old had met with foul play.
A person may have had a heart attack, fell face first to the floor, and that's why there's blood there.
But then, when officers at the scene gently turned Marie over, they made a shocking discovery. This was no natural death.
Marie Zappi had a necktie wrapped around her neck.
It was a suicide, according to Tina. And she based that on the note she gave the police. A note she said that she had found near her mother's lifeless body.
The note said, "Tell the kids I love them. You don't need me anymore."
Asked why her mother would commit suicide, Tina said she didn't know. And in the days ahead, the investigators would be hard-pressed to find an answer. In fact, the evidence would eventually lead them to a far more disturbing conclusion about her mother's death. Born in 1967, Tina Zappi was a New Jersey native, and her upbringing was about as blue-collar as it could get.
Her father worked as a police officer.
For Tina's mother, life revolved around her husband, her children, and her church.
Marie Zappi is a very devout, traditional Italian woman who cares deeply for her family.
And one traditional value Marie instilled in her daughter was the need to work hard.
Her mom worked nights.
And after her father's sudden death when she was 17, Tina pitched in too. Right out of high school, she got a job at a local supermarket, which is where she first met Chris Lunny.
She was a cashier and I was a stock point. And we kind of hit it off. She was just bubbly, full of energy. Just seemed like a very good person.
After a few weeks of flirting at work, Chris asked Tina out. And before long, the pair was dating, with Marie's blessing.
Chris Lunny and Marie Zappi had a very good relationship.
Mother's always suspicious of the guy who was dating her daughter, but we got along great.
Partly because Chris had ambitions far beyond being a stock boy.
I went to a technical school for electronics technology.
Once Chris finished school, he landed a civilian IT job with the Newark Police Department. And shortly after Tina turned 22, Chris asked her to marry him.
I went to her house and I got down on one knee and I said, "Would you marry me?" And she said yes.
Married in 1992, the young couple soon moved to Fairfield.
They were living in a suburban home in a nice part of Fairfield.
Tina's career had come a long way too. Soon after their marriage, the former grocery clerk took a job with the city of Fairfield.
She worked in the township in the finance department.
And by 1995, the couple was doing so well that they asked Tina's widowed mother to move in.
We thought it would be easier for her to live with us. She had like a little apartment in the house downstairs.
The arrangement also meant that Marie would be closer to her grandchildren. A year after she moved in, Tina and Chris had their first child, a boy.
We were both very happy. I brought my wife a dozen roses. It was just
2 years later, the couple had a daughter.
The kids had a very good relationship with their nana. She watched them a lot. She was very involved in their lives.
Marie stayed very involved in Tina's life too.
The relationship was good. They got along really well.
Best friendship. That's what she described it.
Tina and her mother enjoyed the occasional girls' night out, or even an entire day together, gambling in Atlantic City.
She and her mother would take day trips from Fairfield down to Atlantic City, just for fun.
Not that Tina had a lot of time to feed money into the slot machines. Like her mother before her, she believed in hard work. Once the kids started school, she parlayed her experience with the city's finance department into a private sector job as a financial planner.
At New England Financial, they gave advice to people on their finances.
It was quite an accomplishment for someone who started out as a grocery clerk. Tina had earned her financial skills the hard way, on the job and at home.
Since we first got married, she took over all the bill paying and everything like that, and I was happy because I don't like write checks or anything like that.
He handed her his paycheck and she took care of it.
And thanks to Tina's hard work and careful accounting, the family had all the trappings of a comfortable middle-class life, even if it took a little personal sacrifice on her part.
She wasn't a big spender. She would never buy herself new clothes or anything like that. I
even said to her one time, why don't you go get your nails done? You know, no, I'm not. I don't want to.
There was one thing she openly splurged on, though. Her kids.
Tina wanted her kids to have everything.
She would, you know, jump through hoops for the kids.
And whatever the expense, the girl who'd spent her high school years ringing up groceries made sure that her kids had everything she'd gone without.
Her son was an athlete. She put him in the best training so he could be good at the sports he did. And those lessons are very